Well, hello, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're joining us on YouTube, so excited to have you here with us today. And of course, we have our political host, Will, with us today. It's good to see you, Will.
How's it going, everybody?
Oh, man. Well, I'm doing well, and I'm your faithful host, Josh, of course. And today on Faithful Politics, we're honored to have Professor Rashid Khalidi, a distinguished historian and scholar of Middle Eastern history, particularly Palestinian history and geopolitics. Professor Khalidi currently holds the position of Edward Said Professor of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia University and serves as the director of the Middle East Institute at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. He's a prolific author, and he's written several influential books that delve into the history of Palestine and the Israeli-Palestine conflict and the broader dynamics of the Middle East. His work has been celebrated for its detailed analysis, drawing on various and many sources and having a nuanced understanding of the complex political history. So please join us today in welcoming Professor Rashid Khalidi to Faithful Politics, where we're going to explore some of the intricacies of this conflict in the Middle East. Professor Rashid, can I just call you Rashid? Or do you want me to call you like Your Highness or something like that? Okay, Rashid is good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Rashid. You know, as a start, I would love for you to give our audience, it's a very diverse audience, politically, ethnically, religiously, give us a sense of who is Rashid Khalidi and what brought you here today to be studying this conflict and know so much about this. What was it about the Middle East and everything going on that brought you here today? Who is Rashid Khalidi?
Well, that's a big question. I'll give you as short an answer as I can. I'm a Palestinian-American. I was born in New York because my father was studying here in the United States, could not go back to Palestine in 1948 because of what Palestinians call the Nakba, when many hundreds of thousands were forced to leave their homes. My grandfather's home was in Jaffa. He was eventually forced to leave it, never able to return. So I grew up in the States. I've lived in the Arab world and in other parts of the world for much of my life. My dad ended up working for the United Nations. And so I had an early introduction to this issue because he worked in the Security Council. And I would spend a lot of time going to the office with my dad and sometimes sitting in the visitors gallery of the Security Council and watching things happen and then hearing from behind the scenes what was really happening. So I've been involved in and interested in this because of my, life history and because of my experiences from the time I was a kid. I've lived in Lebanon for many, many years. All of my children were born in Beirut during different phases of the war in Lebanon. I lived there from the 70s through 1983. I taught at the American University there, and I've taught since then at different universities in this country, Georgetown, University of Chicago, and Columbia for the last 20 years. So that's who I am. I'm a New Yorker and I'm a Palestinian. My family comes from Jerusalem.
Awesome.
We have people in my family going back till the Crusades and probably before in Jerusalem.
Wow.
And I have lots of family there. I have family in Gaza, family in Ramallah, family in Jerusalem, and in other parts of the Middle East, like most Palestinian families.
That's pretty fascinating. So I'd imagine with everything that's going on in the Middle East right now, Gaza specifically, it's got to be weighing pretty heavy on your heart. So before we get into maybe some of the more technical questions, I'd love for you to maybe just tell us like what goes through your mind when you're looking at these images and you're seeing what's happening to, I don't know, to just the people of Palestine and everything in Gaza.
I mean, we have family living there. My niece's in-laws are all in Gaza. They're forced to leave their home in Gaza City. They're living in, I cannot describe the conditions to you. I just got a message from my niece yesterday about they were cut off for 3 days. Communications were cut off, so they didn't know if they were alive or okay. And it's I can't describe the situation. It's beyond miserable and horrific, just in terms of deprivation, in terms of fear, in terms of they've been forced to move 5 times. They moved from their home to the south of Gaza. They live in Gaza City. The whole family lives together. They then were forced to go back because there was bombardment in the south to Gaza City. Then they moved to Shifa Hospital, which was bombarded, and they finally ended up going back to the south. And now they're split up in different parts of the southern part of Gaza. And the problem now, besides the fact that there are bombardments all over the Gaza Strip, is that there's not enough food. There's no water. They're struggling to find, firewood to burn. These are people who are well-to-do and are trying to find food, water, and firewood. My niece's brother-in-law is sick, and there's no medicine. So it's indescribable harm. My brother lives in Ramallah. They're in a much more secure situation, but there are people arrested every day by the Israeli army, and Ramallah is relatively immune to the kinds of depredations that are happening all over the West Bank, where they're arresting literally hundreds of people a day and killing 8 to 10 people a day, the Israeli army. So it's a situation much, much worse than it was before this war started on the 7th of October. In terms of Gaza, we're talking about most of a population of 2.3 million who've been forced to leave their homes. So a couple million people, or close to a couple million people, are without shelter, and in many cases not getting enough food every day. And that's the situation of my niece's family. So we wake up every morning hoping everybody's alive. I have 2 or 3 friends who've lost multiple members of their family. One of my students, former students, lost 23 members of her family. And whole families have been wiped out in Gaza. The whole buildings are being destroyed. Supposedly, there's some target there, but in the process, dozens of people or many people are being killed who have nothing to do with the war, obviously. So I can't describe it. We're not being shown the full horror of it, partly because most Western journalists are not able to get in there. And the stringers who are in there, the local stringers, they're doing their best, obviously. Several dozen of them have been killed. About, if I'm not mistaken, 63 journalists have been killed in Gaza. Mostly
my gosh.
as well as huge numbers of healthcare workers, huge numbers, over 100 UN workers, relief workers have been killed. So anybody who says this bombardment, as the president described it accurately, anybody who says this is not indiscriminate has not looked at what's going on. When you wipe out 30 or 20 members of a family, there's no discrimination. When you kill over 100 UN aid workers, when you kill dozens of health workers, clearly what's going on is disproportional and indiscriminate.
Yeah, we spoke with another professor at American University, Professor Mohammed Abu Namir, and the way he described Gaza, I'll never forget. He basically said it's the largest open air prison in the world, and that just really stuck with me, because like when you think of it that way, it really kind of reframes your understanding of the plight of the population there in Gaza. And I know that recently you wrote an article in Foreign Policy where you actually gave Biden an F on his Middle East trip. I'd love for you to maybe walk us through that. Like, why did you decide to give him an F on the way he's handling what's happening over there?
I mean, there's no American president of either party who, after the attack of October 7th, wasn't going to support Israel in responding. So that's a given. But I think that the president's full spectrum support for everything Israel has done has gone above and beyond what one would normally expect of an American politician. And what I am talking about is not just indiscriminate bombardment that's killed 20,000 people, most of whom are women and children. I'm not only talking about that. That in and of itself is, in my view, a whole series of war crimes for which we as a country are responsible, because those are our bombs, our planes, our helicopters, and our artillery pieces that are causing those deaths. I am talking about the cutting off of food, water, fuel, electricity, medicine to a population of 2.3 million people. We should not have ever, under any circumstances, allowed ourselves as a country to be involved in anything like that. You say X group has done Y, you deal with X group. You do not punish
Right.
2.3 million people, the overwhelming majority of whom are children, by cutting off food, water, medicine, electricity, and fuel. And that's not an American decision. That's an Israeli decision. Israel is a sovereign country. But we didn't do anything about that. And if they say they did, then the United States is an ineffectual puffball, which has no ability to change outcomes. Excuse me? I don't believe that. We have a fleet, the 60. There are 2 aircraft carrier battle groups there. There are dozens. There's a Marine landing group on a small carrier. We could have landed hundreds of tons of supplies on the beaches, whatever the Israelis wanted. We could have airdropped them. The Jordanian Air Force is airdropping supplies to the Jordanian hospital. Why is the United States not breaking this Israeli siege if, in fact, we don't agree with what they're doing? So, I mean, these are examples of why I would give the president an F. There's one other thing. At the very beginning of this war, the Secretary of State traveled to Jordan and traveled to Egypt and traveled to Saudi Arabia, in addition to his visits to Israel, obviously, and told the leaders of those countries that the United States supported Israel's effort to expel people from Gaza, temporarily or permanently, is not clear. We know this from 2 sources. We know this from the howls of protest from the Egyptians and the Jordanians, who said, under no circumstances, and they said it in the most rude, categorical terms to Blinken's face in public. And we know it because the Office of Management and Budget on the 20th of October put forward a funding request to Congress, which is still before Congress, by the way, for I forget how many tens of billions of dollars for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, and included in which, I can read you the language, was a request for people displaced from Gaza. So the U.S. administration was party to an Israeli intention to displace Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. Now, you may say, oh, what a wonderful idea. These poor people are under bombardment. Move them to Israel. Move them to Egypt. First of all, no Palestinians the Israelis have ever expelled have ever been allowed to return. So this would not have been a temporary humanitarian gesture. This was intended to ethnically cleanse part of the Gaza Strip, as far as Israel and, I have to say, the United States were concerned. And secondly, this is something that neither the Egyptians nor the Jordanians, under any circumstances, could have accepted. And I could go into the reasons that it has to do with Egyptian internal politics and Jordanian internal politics, but it's actually perfectly understandable to anybody with a elementary college education in Middle East history, which the Secretary of State clearly did not have, which the president clearly did not have, which all of the people around in the bubble around the president did not have. Now, we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars training people in our intelligence service, in our military, in our State Department to understand the politics of this region, where we fought 2 wars in the last 20 odd years. So we have the expertise. That expertise has obviously not been consulted. And they went and said something that was completely unacceptable to both of these governments and morally unacceptable. The United States has allowed Israel to expel people in the past, in 48 and 67. The United States never participated. The United States was never complicit in doing such a thing. And this is morally indefensible. It's still in the budget request, by the way, that is still before Congress, and which Congress has adjourned without yet acting on. So the smoking gun is right there. So, I mean, I would, if it were a lower grade than F-, I would have given this president that lower grade.
If like so it's not just like a 60 F, it's like a 15 or a 10 or a 0.
I very rarely give that to my students, so that would.
I hear you. I understand, man. That's man. Number one, thank you, Rashid, for speaking from your heart and just being really clear and really honest and really, talking about the different sources, the things people can look up. Because I see so much around me, people making blanket statements and really coming from blanket understandings, very generalized and inaccurate understandings, it sounds like, from what you're saying, of the situation on both sides of it, right? Not really understanding what the real conflict is. And I would love for just our listeners and our watchers who have never really been able to wrap their mind around this conflict. Either they've just been pro-Israel because that's all they've been given, or they've been pro-Hamas or I know Hamas and Palestinian are not the same thing. That's not what I'm saying. But they've been pro, whatever side it is they want. And they just kind of choose the data that fits kind of their bill. Give us an understanding of this conflict, its origins, and how we've come to here today, and maybe even focusing on some of the things that you have found that people really misunderstand and don't understand the significance of.
I mean, there's a huge amount of misunderstanding all over the map, as you say. And a lot of people essentially have been taught a narrative that was largely crafted by Israel or supportive of Israel. Increasingly, young people are coming to see another side of this, and some of them are misinformed as well, I'm sure. And in fact, the polling shows that support for the Palestinians is much greater among younger people than it is among older people, and there are other differences in that. But that doesn't mean that people are really knowledgeable. And I've taught, Middle East history for my entire life. I've been teaching for 50 years. I started teaching in 1974. So I've been at it for a while. And obviously, I mean, let me start by saying I'm not a neutral observer. I'm a Palestinian. I have lived in the Arab world. I have family in Palestine. At the same time, I'm a trained historian. I've written a lot of stuff about this. I've done a lot of research about it. So, people can take or leave what I say, given my background. Some people will immediately say exclude it because, that guy is biased because of who he is. Be that as it may.
You're not talking to those people. You're not talking to them. They're already gone. Let's talk to the ones that we can.
I talk to everybody. I mean, whoever takes my course, I talk to them. Whoever listens to my lectures,
exactly,
I talk
right.
to them. I don't care. And sometimes people move from where they were to a different, better place in my experience. Anyway, let me talk about some of the misconceptions. I think that's a really good idea about where to start. This is not a conflict that has gone on since time immemorial. Okay? There was never a struggle between Jews and Arabs or Jews and Muslims in Palestine in history, ever. Okay? This is new. This is a function of the rise of nationalism, Zionism, which is a nationalist movement. It has other characteristics, but it's a national movement. The idea that the Jewish people should return to the land of Israel and form a modern nation state. That's a modern, late 19th century political ideology, a nationalist ideology. And it's a function of the rise of Arab nationalism and Palestinian nationalism, none of which existed 200 years ago. You did not have you didn't have Zionism, and you didn't have Arab nationalism in 1823 or in 1873. Did not exist. This is a modern phenomenon, this whole struggle over Palestine. That's the most important thing to understand. And people who tell you, well, this goes back to the Crusades, or this goes back to the Islamic conflict, or this goes back to David and Solomon, are basically repeating nationalist myths. The conflict did not exist for thousands of years between these two groups. Okay, there was conflict over Palestine. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying there was no Jewish Arab or Muslim Jewish conflict in Palestine ever in history, ever. In fact, the Jews returned to Jerusalem after the Islamic conquest because the Byzantines wouldn't allow Jews in Jerusalem. So, far from the conflict, the situation in the 7th century was very different. So that brings us to the modern era, which is when Zionism begins and when Arab nationalism begins. And then there's another factor. This struggle has always been mediated and affected by external intervention. If the British don't take Palestine in World War I, if the British don't issue the Balfour Declaration, if the British don't get the League of Nations to give them a mandate for Palestine, none of what follows would have followed in the way that it did. I mean, it's really important to understand this. This is not just Jews and Arabs. This is Zionism, the nationalist project that Theodor Herzl starts in the 1890s. And this is the rise of nationalism among Arabs at about the same time. modern nation-state nationalism, and the intervention of this great imperialist power, Britain. And ever since, it has also been influenced by those kinds of external influences. The resolution to partition Palestine in 1947 is passed by the strong-arm tactics of the United States and the Soviet Union working together. You don't have that bullying by those two superpowers. You don't have a partition resolution. You don't have the State of Israel. The State of Israel is established as a result of a resolution passed by the United Nations General Assembly in 1947. And I could go on and on and on, but I think those are two really important things to understand. It is a modern struggle related to nationalism and external intervention. And it does not go back to time immemorial. I mean, that's how I would start, by deconstructing a lot of the myths. So
can I inject a question in there just to get some clarity? So I number one, this conversation is so fascinating to me. I love talking to trained historians because I feel like so many times people throw things out about the past and make so many anachronisms, so many false understandings of what life was like back then, how people thought, the decisions they might have made, because we just think, oh, well, I would make that decision, so they would make that decision. Well, it doesn't work like that in human history. So one question though, talk to us a little bit about the religious aspect. And I know that when we get into the religious aspect, we get into a little bit of more mystical. Sometimes it can even be like scary ground to go on because people can get offended. It's about, ultimate beliefs and ideas that people have. But of course, we can't really ignore this idea of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Mhm.
Help us understand the conflict between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism as far back as you feel like we need to go to understand, what is going on here. Because people even go as much to say, well, the Muslims came from Ishmael, right? And the Jews came from Isaac. And so now there's this conflict, of who, and we trace these, and people go back even that far. So it becomes existential, because it's religious. And which I'm a very religious person. I get it. I totally understand. I'm not going to make assumptions about your religion, but I know that you've had a lot of contact and interaction with it. So talk to us a little bit about that. Help us understand the religious aspect of this.
I mean, I think we have to distinguish between belief and what we know from archaeology and history. If we talk about belief, both Muslims and Jews, as it happens, believe what you just said, that Muslims come, that Muslims and Jews are cousins in the sense that they're all children of Abraham. That is a belief in Islam, and it's a belief in Judaism, as it happens. So in Arabic, sometimes when you're talking about Jews, you say ulad al-am, our cousins, going right back to that idea.
Wow.
Of Ishmael. My son's name is Ismail.
And it's a great name.
Yeah, it's a great name. It's my father's name. That's a tradition with us. The eldest son names the eldest son for the. Whatever.
That's so cool.
So that's a belief. Now, is there any historical or archaeological evidence for any of that? No. But any believer believes that. I mean, that is your belief. If you're a believer, if you're a Muslim or a Jewish believer, you believe that. And in fact, Jews, Christians as well. It's in the Bible, right? So I think you have to distinguish between belief, which is a matter of faith, and whatever we've been able to prove archaeologically and historically. And we've been able to prove a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that's very unclear, and I don't think that matters. Let's leave that aside.
Because I want to hear that thought, but the idea, what I'm hearing is like that belief, that's what we have to deal with now. Whatever happened then, but we have to deal with the belief now.
Exactly. I mean, I would argue as a historian that most of what nationalists believe is myth. So say the French taught their children under the Third Republic that they're all descendants of the Gauls. It's historical nonsense. But the French people believed that, and that belief is a reality. It doesn't matter what archaeologists and linguists and historians tell us. That was what children were taught to believe. And that was a fact. Nationalism is a fact. I mean, all these historians who debunk nationalism are right in saying these are myths, but it doesn't matter. Those myths have enormous purchase. The same is true with religion.
Yes.
It doesn't
Yes,
matter
absolutely.
what the historians and the archaeologists say. Belief is belief. That's a fact. What people believe is what you have to deal with, because that's what motivates them, and so on and so forth. Whether it's a nationalist belief or a religious belief or an ideal, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So yeah, I'm with you on that. That is another. This doesn't challenge belief. It simply says this is all that we've been able to prove historically or archaeologically. Now, I'm not an ancient historian. I'm not going to go back to
Sure.
biblical times or pre-biblical times. And I'm not also a geneticist. And I'm not going to say the people who claim to be Palestinians actually descend from XYZ, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, the Philistines.
Right.
Well, actually, you can't prove that because we don't have any
Right.
Jebusite or Canaanite or Philistine DNA.
There you go.
And if you
Yes.
got it, it probably wouldn't prove very much. And the same is true with Jews. I mean, what matters to a certain extent is what people believe, or what may be in the Quran or the Bible.
Mm.
So again, you got to push all of that out as far as reality is concerned, or what we can discern was real. But belief is really important. So for Jews, the connection of Judaism, both historically and in belief, to the Holy Land is, incontrovertible. The religion
Right.
developed there.
Right.
Judaism, it developed also in Baghdad. It developed elsewhere. The Talmudic and rabbinical Judaism that we know actually developed long after the biblical period, but the belief and the connection is there. The real connection and the belief are there. And Christian belief is obviously anchored in Palestine. We all know that. The passion of Jesus, his crucifixion, and so on. Those are historical facts, and they're also beliefs. Okay, so there's a real connection. And then there are beliefs which, can and cannot be proved, but we don't care because that's what people believe, because that's what's in their holy text.
Exactly.
Muslims believe that all prophets of the Bible are true prophets of God. They believe that that Jews and Christians really received revelation from God. So all three monotheistic religions believe that the prophets of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Bible, and of the New Testament are legitimate prophets. This is belief. I'm just talking about what people believe. All Muslims believe. And they also believe that Palestine is a holy land. There's a verse of the Quran which talks about the prophet's night journey and the fact that to Jerusalem, and the fact that the Holy Land is blessed by God. So all three monotheistic religions have some of the same beliefs. Now,
Yes.
obviously, Jews and Christians don't believe that Muhammad was a prophet. Muslims believe that all the others are prophets as well as Muhammad. It doesn't matter. Those are the beliefs. So we have a problem here because for all three monotheistic religions, this is a holy land. Now, for Muslims, obviously, Mecca and Medina are the first and second most important holy cities, but Jerusalem is the third.
Right.
For Christians, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth are uniquely important. And the land of Israel for Jews is uniquely important. But you do have, as you're suggesting, a religious element here, because for all three of these monotheistic religions, there is a deep, abiding, historic connection to the Holy Land. I mean, if you want to see that, you can see it in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You want to see that, you can see that in synagogues that have been excavated all over Palestine, all over Israel. And if you want to see that, you just go to Jerusalem and look at the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which are built within decades of the Muslim conquest. I mean, obviously, this is an important place to all three religions. It doesn't take any archaeologist, any historian of religion can tell you that. And that's part of the problem, obviously, that there are connections to this place, which in some cases are contradictory. The same places are holy. So the Muslims built these mosques because they believed that place was holy to begin with, because of Judaism. So you obviously have a problem. You have two levels of, if you want to call it, sacrality or sacredness in the same place. And that's true in Hebron, and it's true a bunch of other sites in Israel and Palestine. Now, let me say one more thing about religion. One of the fascinating things about Zionism and Palestinian nationalism is that until quite recently, both of them were largely secular. Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern political Zionism, Chaim Weizmann, the successor and the first president of the state of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, and every early Zionist leader were secular Jews. They were not Orthodox. No, they may have been observant, but they were essentially secular nationalist politicians. Same is true for most for most Palestinian leaders, both Muslim and Christian. There were a few religious figures, the Mufti and a couple others. Most of them were secular. My uncle was one of them. I show you a picture of my uncle.
That's awesome. Please.
That's him in an Ottoman uniform. Well, actually,
cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, clearly not a religious figure. Look at the mustache. Clearly not a religious. These are his memoirs. So you're talking about two political movements which obviously have roots in religious belief. It's Zionism, certainly, and also Palestinian nationalism, but which are essentially modern secular nationalist political movements, talking about a nation state and so on and so forth, with a religious element. And there has, of course, been a change. I mean, the rise of Hamas and the rise of religious nationalism in Israel have transformed the politics of both groups, Palestinians and Israelis. They're not majorities. Hamas has never won a majority in an election. The religious nationalists have never won a majority in an Israeli election. They're powerful forces. And we can talk about that if you want. But it's an interesting fact that Likud, Fatah, the PLO, are essentially secular political movements, the Labor Party and so on and so forth. Most of them. Now, they include people who are deeply religious. They include people who have faith. That's not the point.
Of course.
The point is that they are political movements like the Democratic and Republican parties, or like the Labor Party and the Conservative Party, which are essentially secular with many religious people who are members. There are religious parties in Israel, and Hamas is a self-proclaimed religious movement. So religiously inspired movements have growing importance among both Palestinians and Israelis. But the founding of both of these, sets of ideas, Palestinian and Israeli nationalism, was essentially the work of namely secular politicians. It's an interesting fact.
Yeah, I appreciate you kind of breaking down some of the myths and misconceptions earlier, because, I mean, as one that's not as attuned to the stuff as someone like yourself, like, it's easy for me just to say, oh, it's just like the conflict deals with just some, centuries old religious disputes or what have you. But what you're saying is it's probably less of that, more nationalistic, more politics, more whatever. And I'd love to kind of have you maybe unpack that a little bit more, because it seems like, I mean, I don't think there would ever be a good time for this conflict to take place, but the fact that it's taking place now, with the U.S. having an election next year, I mean, Russia is having an election for whatever that's worth, and with Netanyahu having his own like legal issues, it seems like this moment's sort of right to do things and respond in a way that would be politically advantageous for your people group, your coalition, your political party, what have you. So can you talk a little bit more about sort of the politics that's taking place, and how that might infer how we look at some of the decisions these big countries are making?
Let me say four things. The first is that Israel was roiled by deep political divisions before this war started. There was a lot of opposition to some of the constitutional and legal measures that the coalition government was trying to bring in. And Netanyahu has become much more unpopular as a result of this war. The failure to anticipate the attack by Hamas, the overwhelming scale of Israeli civilian casualties. More Israeli civilians were killed at the beginning of this war than in any of Israel's wars, including going right back to 1948. Almost 800 Israeli civilians were killed. In 1948, for example, 6,000 Israelis died. Almost all of them were soldiers. In the Second Intifada, around 700 Israeli civilians were killed. I'm not talking about soldiers. I'm just talking about civilians. This war, at least about 800 were killed. So it's the largest civilian death toll. And there's a lot of anger in Israel about that, not just at Hamas, obviously, but how did we let this happen? And a lot of that is being directed at Netanyahu. And his political survival is to some extent now linked to this war. And you can read the Israeli press if you're interested. They're after him all the time, all of them, from center right to left. Palestinian politics are deeply divided and have been really since the establishment of Hamas in the late 1980s. Palestinians are divided between the PLO on one side that argues for a two-state solution, a diplomatic solution, renounced violence, and Hamas, which believes in armed struggle, in violence, doesn't, well, they sometimes they say they accept the two-state solution, but sometimes no, and is much more uncompromising, let's put it that way, and was the group that launched this attack on the 7th, obviously, of October. And that division is a huge problem for the Palestinians and for anybody, I would argue, who wants a resolution. It's a division that has been fostered and encouraged by outside parties. Israel, notably, divide and rule. You keep your opponent weak, and you claim they're all a bunch of terrorists, and you don't have to negotiate, and you can take, you can annex more land and establish more settlements and so on. And that's what governments under Netanyahu have been doing for most of the past 15 or so years. So that's the Palestinians. Finally, we have us, the United States. And I agree with the premise of your question. A lot of this is, I think, affected by electoral politics. A lot of this is affected by positioning by the president and the Democrats and leadership of the Democratic Party, and by former President Trump and Republicans and the Republican Party, essentially playing politics with this in different ways. Now, I think I said at the very beginning, I think most American governments, every American administration I can imagine, past or future, would probably support Israel to a very large extent. That's been the history of American policy since 1948, 47, when we voted for partition of Palestine and gave most of Palestine to the Jewish minority. So the Jewish state was to be established in most of a country that had an Arab majority in 1947. Go back to that if you want to talk about the history. So that's been American policy. I would argue that we are now facing some really interesting, as we get into January in an election year, we're facing some really interesting issues about the president's support for Israel, about the Republican Party trying to outbid him and say, he's not supportive enough, or whatever they might say, or playing it the other way. You see that on Ukraine. You have some politicians saying we shouldn't support Ukraine on the left of the Democratic Party and on the right of the Republican Party. And I wouldn't be entirely surprised if a little of that develops into 2024 in an election year. So that's a mess. Every one of the three situations I mentioned is actually a mess. Yeah. Finally, there's a global situation, which is most countries in the world, the global South, and most other powers are beginning to see this differently than the United States government does. Okay? You've had now the British, the Germans, and the French separating themselves from the United States, and those are the closest allies of the United States in the world, as well as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and calling for a ceasefire, which the United States categorically opposes. And it is completely isolated globally now with Israel. And so you have a global situation that's developing, which I think is also going to affect things. I don't know how. I'm not a crystal ball gazer, but I spent a lot of time as a kid at the United Nations. I followed the United Nations my whole life. I've written about it. And you look at those votes in the General Assembly, and they indicate a very clear trend. And you read what the British Foreign Secretary and the German Foreign Minister said the other day in an op-ed. You listen to the French. The tide is moving. And you go to the global South, and they see things completely different. They see Israel as a colonial reality supported by powers that were great colonial powers in their past. So you talk to a Jamaican, or you talk to somebody from East Africa, or you talk to somebody from the Middle East, or you talk to somebody from India, and they may be more supportive of Israel or less, but they see this through an anti-colonial frame because that's their history. They have no love for the British. They know the role of the British in Palestine. You talk to an Irish person, and they will tell you, oh yeah, Lord Balfour, before he went and messed up Palestine, he messed up Ireland as chief secretary in Dublin Castle from 18 whatever, and we call him Bloody Balfour. You talk to a Jamaican, and they'll tell you, oh, da, da, da. And I mean, I'm not talking about history. I'm talking about people I talk to and what I read, and the journalists I talk to from India and from other parts of the world. And that's another thing that people should be paying attention to, I think. This global, if you're thinking of it in terms of American strategy, is it a really great thing to have everybody in the world aligned with China and Russia and Iran? Which is the
No.
situation today. They're closer to the position of countries which are at the very least rivals of the United States than they are to the position of the United States. Which is not to say the United States should or shouldn't do something because everybody else thinks differently. It's just maybe that should be a consideration in American foreign policy and strategy.
It should set off some alarm bells to wonder, hey, what's going on in the American people who, and I mean, I will say, for all the faults that America has, in one sense, once it seems like the voter is going a certain way, politicians tend to lean that way
With a delay.
Get there.
Tragic.
With a delay, no doubt. Tragic delay.
I mean,
I'm
of the era of Vietnam. It took years and years and years before public opinion realized this was a bad thing.
And Afghanistan, right? We just saw this and we pulled.
Afghanistan,
I mean, it was a disaster.
Iraq. I mean, the people figured it out long before the politicians. And I think that's happening here. I mean, if you look at the polls, it's very, very clear that the president's policy is losing support. It's very, very clear that especially among young people and among minorities and also trade unions. I mean, the mainstream media are not reporting United Auto Workers, the nurses, the electricians, the postal workers have all come out for a ceasefire. I have not seen that reported in the New York Times, a newspaper I loathe, by the way. I read it every morning because I have to deal with the media, but I don't read it with any pleasure, I promise you. My point is...
That's awesome.
My point is that there's a tide among especially young people and a lot of other sectors of American society that it follows the lines of what you just said. The people are smarter than their leaders or than the politicians.
So I want to dig into the ceasefire a little bit, and I know that you're not a futurist. I get that, but you do understand cause and effect, and you do understand these entities way better than I do. So, given these recent developments, the things that we've been talking about, right, including this veto, of the U.S. on the UN Security Council resolutions calling for a humanitarian ceasefire, like you've mentioned. So, what do you envision as a sustainable and lasting peace? Is that what would that look like? And again, I'm giving you an impossible question to answer, but we got to talk about it. What would a ceasefire even look like? What would Will and I need to see on the news, if they actually would ever report it, that would make us feel like, oh man, that sounds like things are going well in the Middle East, and we should support this?
Let me distinguish between a sustainable and lasting peace and a halt to these hostilities. I think that for us to get a sustainable, just peace is going to require big changes in the United States.
That's good, yeah.
So I frankly am very pessimistic about our having a sustainable peace. A sustainable and just peace involves equal rights for everybody. We're very far away from that. And I could go into this if you want. You can't have one people's security established at the expense of another people's insecurity, which is the current situation, has been a situation for generations. I mean, I hate to say it, but Palestinian insecurity
that makes sense.
Sort of established as the condition. Israelis have to be secure. That means we have to have people in jail. That means we have to have barbed wire and checkpoints and so on and so forth. And everybody says, well, that's security. We can't be secure otherwise. You cannot do that. You cannot have one class of people whose security is dependent on the insecurity of another class of people. And you can't have laws where one people has certain rights and another. And I don't want to go there now because we're so far away in Palestinian politics. Palestinians have to be unified, have to have a clear strategy, have to be able to say, this is what we want. The Palestinians had that back in the days of the PLO. They don't really have it right now. They're divided. I've already said that. And Israel is far away from accepting that they're going to have to change a lot of things if they're ever going to have a sustainable, just, lasting peace. And our country, I mean, we've been an obstacle to peace in Palestine. You know, the United States helped to broker peace between Egypt and Israel, between Jordan and Israel. We have not, and they tried with Syria and Israel. I was involved in some of those negotiations, not with Syria, between Israel and between the Palestinians and the Israelis in the 90s. And the United States tried. But as far as Palestine is concerned, most unhelpful. And that has to change. The United States has been an obstacle to peace, in my view, where the Palestinians are concerned. So let's not talk about peace. I'd love to. I mean, Palestinians are suffering. So my family, I have direct.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
But I unfortunately, as a realist, I have to say we're with none of those three parties are we yet there. Now, what would I like to see? I would like to see an immediate ceasefire, and I will tell you why I would like to see an immediate ceasefire and a lasting ceasefire. First of all, the humanitarian suffering that Israel and the United States are imposing is not just inhuman. It will create more violence. You do this to people,
Absolutely.
and you will breed, inevitably, necessarily, a horrible reaction, which will probably, in some cases, unfortunately, be violent. I'm not saying anything that anybody with any brains would argue with. I mean, the former defense secretary of Britain just published an article in the Telegraph where he said the same thing. He said, fight Hamas, kill whatever. They're horrible. I hate them. But, and American generals, some of them have said the same thing. I mean, Lloyd Austin, 4-star general, current Secretary of Defense, said the same thing. Strategically, you can lose this war by doing what you're doing to civilians. You can win tactically and you lose. So I would argue that even from the point of view of Israel's interest, but certainly from the point of view of the United States, what interest do we have in making 2 million people suffer in front of the whole world? Just because our media
None.
prevents most people most of the time from seeing most of the suffering does not mean that people all over the world are not seeing it. They're seeing it. MSNBC and CNN and Fox are not showing us what's going on in detail. Everybody else is seeing it. And they're not just getting angry about the poor Palestinians or what the Israelis do. They're getting angry at the United States. So I would argue this is an imperative from a humanitarian perspective, but also from a strategic perspective, even from an Israeli strategic perspective. I'm not an Israeli. I'm not speaking for Israel. But I would say, as an American, I think it is in the American national interest. As a person who has a moral conscience, I cannot see how we support this siege of 2.3 million people. I don't see it. I don't understand why everybody doesn't see this as enormously counterproductive to American, let alone Israeli interests. The Israelis, very strong country, take care of themselves. It's against American interests. And it's certainly against the interest of everybody in the Middle East who sympathizes with the Palestinians. I mean, we saw the first and biggest demonstrations in Egypt for 10 years. Egypt doesn't allow demonstrations. They were forced to allow. We've seen the biggest demonstrations all across the Middle East, Arab countries, Iran, Turkey. We've seen demonstrations in Indonesia, Pakistan, India, all over the world. 1 million people in London. Well, everybody's pretty unhappy about this, and everybody's calling for a ceasefire. And we, the United States, is the obstacle. Now, Israel might not accept, but that's their choice. If the United States says, no, we will not veto a Security Council resolution, or the United States says, we will land 100,000 tons of supplies on the beaches in Gaza, and we'll shoot at you if you stop us. We'll shoot at anybody who stops us. I mean, we could do that. We could airdrop supplies without anybody being harmed. The Jordanians, for heaven's sakes, are doing it. The Jordanian Air Force is doing it. A princess of the royal family was photographed on Jordanian TV dropping supplies to Gaza. I mean, hello? Jordan is doing it, and we're not. So, I mean, I think that is a pretty straightforward ask. And obviously, it should be linked to the release of hostages. Obviously, the civilian hostages especially, the Israeli civilian hostages. It should be linked to the Palestinian prisoners, most of whom, in my view, are also hostages. Israel has been arresting people in the West Bank literally by the hundreds. Mm-hmm. They have 7,000 people in jail, of whom a couple of thousand have never been indicted, charged, tried, convicted. They're just administratively detained. Okay? It's the kind of thing that we have a constitution and the British have a Magna Carta to prevent. You just don't arrest people without bringing them to trial, charging them, indicting them, convicting them. Israel does that systematically. It's an old British colonial law going back to the British Mandate that the Israelis have used on Palestinians mainly ever since Israel was established. Well, those are hostages as far as I'm concerned, just like the those Israeli civilians who were captured and taken in violation of international humanitarian law into Gaza and are now trying to survive God knows where, in the tunnels, I suppose. Some of whom have been killed by Israeli bombing. And that's why there's this enormous movement inside Israel of families of the hostages saying, whatever they want, release prisoners, just get our people out. So, I mean, I would argue that those are things that should be, all of those things, a ceasefire, hostage exchange, release, whatever, should be done forthwith. And this humanitarian crisis should be ended by a massive global effort. Just to people have food and water and electricity and fuel. I mean, basics.
Yeah. And some of those hostages were even shot by the IDF soldiers.
Right.
Sadly.
3 of them were killed.
I was thinking, I feel very empathetic, and maybe sympathetic's the word, for folks in Congress that do show support or compassion for a lot of the Palestinians. So, like Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. I mean, she was censured before for some of her comments, actions, what have you. And I feel like a lot of where I feel like where she's coming from is from a sense of she knows people in Palestine. She has relatives, family members. She understands kind of the dynamics better than most Americans do. I mean, like if we're being honest, like most Americans don't really follow global politics, right? So they just kind of catch the 5-second clip on whatever, and they're like, they draft an entire narrative about what's happening over there, right? So I'd love for you to maybe kind of talk about some of the behind the scenes stuff within the Palestinian politics that allows groups like Hamas to do what they did and are doing, because I think it's easy for Americans to think, well, to group Hamas and the broader Palestinian population together and say, well, if they're allowing them to, fire mortars from the hospital, then aren't they just complicit? So I'd love for you to kind of just talk about sort of the behind the scenes, like a Palestinian government.
I mean, we haven't got much time left, and this is I'll take a deep dive into it, and you tell me if I've gone too deep.
Okay,
you're good to go, man.
Yeah, one of the sad things about Palestinian politics is that from the 70s into the 80s, the mainstream in Palestinian politics, which is represented by the PLO, was moving towards a compromise with Israel. And in 1988, the Palestinians changed their charter, the PLO changed its charter, renounced violence, accepted a two-state solution, called for a Palestinian state alongside Israel, and was overwhelmingly popular among Palestinians. And it was in that context that Hamas was established, saying, no, you guys have compromised too much. You're going to give up on violence. We're going to continue to use violence. The tragedy is that in the 1990s, when there were negotiations, I was an advisor to the Palestinian delegation in the negotiations that started at Madrid and continued in Washington for a couple of years. And then later on, the PLO negotiated directly with Israel, and they negotiated the Oslo Accords. I don't want to go into the weeds here. The Oslo Accords did not fundamentally change the situation of the Palestinians. It actually made their situation worse. What do I mean? We didn't have checkpoints before Oslo. We didn't have a wall before Oslo. We didn't have Palestinians banned from working in Israel before Oslo. Palestinian GDP per capita was higher before Oslo. Palestinian movement was freer. I could go on and on and on. The Oslo Accords did not bring the Palestinians nearer to a Palestinian state. They established a Palestinian Authority that had no authority, no jurisdiction, no sovereignty. Israel still has security control over the entirety of what used to be Palestine, Israel and the occupied territories. That turned people away from a peaceful solution. The failure of the PLO to achieve any Palestinian goals, in fact, the result was Palestinians were worse off, gave support to Hamas. And what has happened in the last 15 or 20 years, the failure of the United States to push for a negotiated solution of two states, any other kind of real solution, and just to allow Israeli settlements to expand and expand. When we went to Madrid, I never went to Oslo in my life. When we went to Madrid, there were about 100,000 Israeli settlers in the occupied territories. There are 750,000 now in the West Bank and Arab East Jerusalem. That's the result of Oslo. That's how Palestinians see it. And so when people come and say there's nothing but violence, by not supporting, by not encouraging, by not forcing negotiations that the majority wanted and still wants. I mean, there are polls that say Palestinians still, by a majority, want a two-state solution, negotiate two-state. So by not doing anything in that regard, you in effect are pushing Palestinians towards Hamas. That is what has happened. As a result, partly of our policy, as a result of Israeli, as a result of the fecklessness of Palestinian politicians. I mean, you want me to start on Palestinian politics, I could talk about how bad I think the PLO leadership and the Hamas leadership have been. That's a Palestinian issue. So it's not just the Americans or just the Israelis or the international community. But if you look at overall, where have there been negotiations for the last 15 years? Nothing. Towards a real solution? Nothing. And that, I mean, what is left for people who are living under occupation for 56 years? Military occupation means no law. It means no rights. It means you are at the arbitrary discretion of a 19-year-old with a gun who never is held accountable for his or her actions. Nobody's ever punished for shooting a Palestinian. I mean, what happened to those poor hostages happens to Palestinians all the time. Those 3 hostages who escaped from Hamas and were shot down by Israeli soldiers in a combat situation. That happens in non-combat situations all over Palestine all the time. Look at the casualty totals. Some of the guys are militants who are killed. Huge numbers are civilians. And that's what military occupation is like. And that's what Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem have lived under since 1967. And we have allowed that to happen. We don't even try and say occupation must end. We don't even say, the United States government no longer says occupation is end. We have encouraged a situation that has produced support for Hamas. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's true, unfortunately. I'm sorry, that was a long...
Oh, no. I mean, that was really good. I mean, we don't have a lot of time left, but one thing that I would want to ask is, addressing our audience, again, which is fairly diverse, what would you want them to hear from your heart? I mean, you've been speaking on that, but even beyond just policy stuff, it can include policy stuff, of course, whatever you feel relevant to share. But what kind of speak from your heart as to what you want them to understand most about this conflict and about what's happening. Is there anything that you feel like they can do or any ways that they can be involved to be towards a solution instead of being a part of the expanding problem?
I mean, what I always say to anybody I talk to about this is, however far away this is and however distant it seems, we as Americans are deeply involved. And we have to inform ourselves about this because morally, we are complicit in whatever happens. If there's not peace, or if there is peace, if there's death and deprivation, or there's not, I mean, we're part of this. Israel is an independent state. It does what it wants, but it does it with $3.8 billion a year in American military assistance. Every year, $3.8 billion. Those are our weapons. Every airplane that the Israeli Air Force flies is an American plane. F-35s, F-15s, F-16s. Their helicopters are Apaches. Those are American. Their artillery, 155, 175, that's American. The shells, the bombs, the rockets, most of them are American. So we are involved, like it or not, distant or not. It is our actions or our inaction that contribute to those outcomes. And I think, and to the humanitarian situation. I mean, we have a responsibility, unfortunately. The United States helped create this problem. The United States has tried to solve this problem. The United States is part of the problem and part necessarily of the solution. And I think the very least people should do is inform themselves. And there's a ton of stuff out there that they can look at, partisan and nonpartisan, and whatever. Don't believe what's in the mainstream media. Much of it is just should be ignored. There's lots of other sources. And express your concerns to the people who are supposed to represent us. If you're not happy about it, tell them. It actually has an effect. As you rightly said, the people are smarter than their leaders. It takes a long time before they finally will respond, but they have to respond sooner or later. And I hope we could be part of the problem. I mean, a lot of people are suffering, Palestinians obviously, but also Israelis, and everybody who feels connected to them. And that's a religious connection, and that's an ethnic connection. I mean, Muslims. There are Palestinian Christians in a church in Gaza, 2 of whom were killed by snipers the other day. And the Pope has raised a fuss. It's a Catholic church. The Pope has raised a fuss. One of the hospitals that was bombed was a Baptist hospital. And you know, whether people are being used as human shields or whatever, there's international humanitarian law which says you can only do X, Y, Z to competence, but you can't do A, B, C to non-competence. There are rules about that. And the United States talks airily about this. We should be, if we really believe in international law, we should be arguing strongly for a much more rigorous interpretation of that law. I'm not a lawyer, but I've read a lot of this stuff, and I don't think that's what's happening out there, whatever the president may say, whatever the politicians may say. And, you know, both parties are actually pretty much on the same, singing the same tune where Israel is concerned.
Right.
And I don't think that necessarily represents the grassroots of either party, frankly. I think people should make their voices heard if they don't agree. If they agree, fine. That's another thing. So I really think people should learn more and speak up.
You know, it's funny because that's not the right word I'm trying to say. Nothing about this is funny. It's all very tragic. But I got to ask a question. I know this is like, I just said this was the last question, but now it's the actual last question before I kind of let you help us understand how we can learn more about it and all that stuff, where we can find info. But so when and I'm terrible with politics, I always forget names, but when the representative said that from what is it, from the Jordan, from the river to the sea,
Palestine.
Can you help? Yeah, Palestine will be free. And I had people say to me, well, this person said that. And you know what that means, right? And I didn't know what that means. And I kind of heard what they said that means. I'd like to hear from you.
Right.
What does that mean? And why is it such a rallying call for Palestine?
Well, because from the river to the sea, which is mandatory Palestine, and which is Israel and the occupied territories, this is a territory completely controlled by Israel. Palestinians are not free. Inside Israel, they do have the vote. There's 20% of the Israeli population are Palestinians. But they live in segregated communities. They are deprived in many ways. They're among the poorest people in Israel. And there are multiple discriminatory laws against them. So they're free, but everywhere else in Palestine, Palestinians are not free. They live under occupation or in this open air prison of Gaza. So what it means is Palestinians should be free in their ancestral homeland. It doesn't necessarily mean the destruction of Israel. It doesn't mean the killing of Jews. Anybody who interprets it that way is free to interpret it as they wish. It's not what Palestinians mean, or at least not what I would guess Representative Tlaib meant, or what most Palestinians mean when they say it. Palestinians are unfree. Israelis are free from the river to the sea. Israelis can go anywhere they want under Israeli law. They're not under military law. Palestinians on the West Bank are in military law, but not Israelis. And so actually from the river to the sea is an area which Israel has controlled since 1967, which Israel is busy annexing parts of and spreading its population into. The program of the Likud party, which is one of the leader of the governing coalition in Israel today, in its platform said, from the sea to the river, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. And that's, in fact, what has happened since 1977, which is when that was the party platform. So, on the one hand, Israel has actually taken over the whole land from the river to the sea, and Israelis are free, and Palestinians are. So it's a rallying cry. It has nothing to do with Palestinian politics. It's a slogan in English. It doesn't rhyme in Arabic. People don't say that in Arabic, interestingly enough. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's an English language rallying cry for demonstrators who may not actually know what it means, and I don't think intended to have, quote unquote, genocidal intent. Now, some people take it that way, but that's not what Palestinians do. We see our people as unfree in their entirety of their ancestral home. A place where right now Israeli Jews consider themselves not only to be free, but most of them think they're sovereign and the sole sovereign.
Right.
I could go on and on into those legal.
Yeah. Well,
But
I appreciate that explanation. I wanted to hear it because I hear popular level
right.
explanations, which essentially, well, that just means they want genocide.
Well,
They want all Israel to be destroyed. And I'm like,
in
okay.
2018, the Israeli Knesset passed something called the Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people law, which is a constitutional law. It has constitutional force, which said that in Israel, the only people with the right of self-determination are the Jewish people. And as far as they're concerned, all of what used to be mandatory Palestine is Israel. So they're saying there's only one people here. They're basically denying the Palestinians have national rights in their ancestral home. Now, that's not genocidal, but it's
right.
Israeli sociologists have called it politicide, denying that the Palestinians have political rights in their ancestral home. So
that's a really useful term.
And so you have a bunch of students or a bunch of demonstrators raising a slogan, where on the other hand, Israel has made this part of its constitution. So,
right.
On the one hand, on the other hand, I wrote an op-ed about this, saying, university administrators and people in Congress are howling about the slogan. Well, look what Israel's actually done in its laws, in the platform of this government when it was formed in December. That kind of stuff is, the mainstream in Israel. It is government. It's constitutional. So, again, we gotten into the weeds here, but I think
I love it though. It's so good.
These are all really good questions, and they don't get asked, unfortunately, often enough.
Well, I'm glad to be able to ask it and hear your response. And it's been such a pleasure to have you on, Rashid. How can people keep up with your work, and even what do you recommend for them as a balanced book or documentary or professor or whatever? Obviously yourself, your writings, but what would you recommend as another balanced sense of like a history of Palestine, things like that? Is there anything you would recommend to help people understand this in a more comprehensive and holistic way?
I would obviously recommend what I write. I wrote a book called The 100 Years War on Palestine, which is...
We recommend it as well.
Yeah, I would...
100-Year War on Palestine.
The 100 Years War on Palestine. Now, obviously, it's explicitly written from a Palestinian perspective.
Sure,
but there's 45 pages of footnotes. You don't have to read the footnotes, but if you want to see what he's saying, they're there for you. There are a number of really great Israeli historians. One of my good friends used to teach at Oxford, a man named Avi Shleim, Shlaim. Avi, first name, Shleim. He's originally from an Iraqi Jewish family. Taught at Oxford for his whole career. He wrote a wonderful book called The Iron Wall about Israel and the Arabs. And there are many other really fine Israeli historians I could recommend. And many other, American and European and Palestinian historians. But I would start with Avi and myself.
That's great. That's awesome. And I would recommend, obviously, Will and I recommend any of our listeners and watchers to come check out your work. You have all sorts of op-eds and articles. I'm sure they can just Google, well, I know that because I've done it, Rashid Khalidi, and you will find all, your works. I really appreciate. Do you have any other projects in the docket? Are you working on another book that you would want to let people know about right now?
I'm working on a book on Ireland, Britain, and Palestine. Some of the connections between what Britain was doing in Ireland, the methods that Britain used in its empire, and how those methods were applied to Palestine, and the impact of that on Israel and the Palestinians, and on Ireland going forward. It's a big project. I just started.
Wow.
I've been spending.
Well, dude, I can't wait to read it.
Well, it'll take me some time to write it.
Well, thank you so much for joining the program, Rashid. It's really been a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you both for having me. I appreciate the thoughtful questions. I don't always get such serious questions. I appreciate.
Well, I'm absolutely really appreciate you answering them. To our listeners and watchers, this has been Professor Rashid Khalidi. Again, you can look him up on Google, follow him. He's at Columbia University and look for his writings. We recommend you pick him up and check it out to get a more holistic view of this situation. This has been Josh, and of course, Will. Thanks for being with us, Will. And until next time, guys, don't keep your conversations left or right, but up. God bless and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me.